Hello, my name is Andrew Brooks. This is Non-Linear Existentialism, Hegel's Dialectic and Feedback Loops, subtitled Neuronal Movement as a Neurophysiological Analog of Hegel's Dialectic. Table of contents. Basically, I'm going to be posing a question to see if there is similarity between non-linear existentialism and Hegel's phenomenology of spirit and the components within it. I'm going to be doing this by comparing the various components, but mostly I'm just going to be reading a few items off of this, and then the reader can just go through the items themselves, especially the quotations. I'm not going to have extensive quotations because there's so many things that could be quoted from. One issue I had with Hegel is that because he's doing abstractions, they're leading to contradictions, so I'm trying to come up with the quotations that seem to be the firmest and the clearest. So basically the question I have is, can Hegel's phenomenology of the spirit be interpreted as a cognitive feedback loop similar to that as described by non-linear existentialism? Basically going over non-linear existentialism, have the object emits energy, the subject receives the energy from the object, and as I posed before, we have frequency, amplitude, modulation, and we have a quantity-quality pairing, and then basically that quantity-quality pairing is compared to the energies within the cerebral hemispheres, and then if there's an increase or decrease, then the subject will go to or away from the emitting object. This is comparability elements of NLE, which will be compared to Hegel's. So basically, physical or conceptual, it is physical and conceptual non-abstract processes are detailed. In existentialism is the key to it, so it's individual as opposed to Hegel's. The goal is to increase cerebral energy. How is it achieved? The general process is a hybrid positive-negative feedback loop. How is it achieved? The specific process is a magnetic loop, magnetic field, as produced by V1b of the cerebral hemispheres. In comparison, phenomenology of the spirit is conceptual. Historical, it isn't existentialism per se. The goal is absolute truth or knowledge or truth. How is it achieved? General non-physical process, and what he goes towards is force and infinity. How is it achieved? Specific non-physical process. The dialectic, what basically has is the opposites. You have basically thesis, antithesis, synthesis is between the two. However, in his book, I could not find anything he exactly said that he turned it more of a three-part process with a third in the middle, but he didn't use the terms I mentioned before. And then movement, but I wasn't sure whether that was going to be actually a metaphor or not, but it seems to imply that it could or could not be. And negation, which we'll go into later. This is going to be off the 1977 book translated by A.V. Miller, analyst by J.N. Finley. Please go over these quotations yourself. I'll let you read them at your leisure when you have time. But basically, what appears as truth for him is going from in itself to for itself. In itself is going to be the true nature of the truth that as Hegel sees it, and for itself is perhaps for itself is going to be a quantity-quality thing, whereas the in itself is going to be the quality, could be energy, and for itself is a quantity that's basically paired with or associated with the in itself. Another thing is the notion and object. For notion for him is the idea of being for another, and being in itself is the object. Notion is the idea. Idea gives the concept of a quantity that's going to be attached to the in itself, which would be the quality or the object. Again, with the idea of truth, and at the bottom here it is just through the absolute character of the thing and its opposition that it relates itself to others and essentially only relating. It's referential knowledge as non-linear existentialism. So that's the idea of how can you come to with absolute truth if it's reference into something else. And the only way it can figure out that it's reference, and through that it allows for the stripping away of the external, which he refers to later on as the sensible and supersensible. So once the outer for itself and such is stripped away, they have the in itself, which is the energy. And how is it achieved? Through force, very much like non-linear existentialism. You can please go through it yourself. And again, going back to the idea of force and universal for him seems again to go back to the in itself. The universal is not a particularized thing, such as would be energy, within the cerebral cortex. Again, with force, please go over this again. Again, goes to the idea that it appears to be a force, which could possibly get into the idea of a force which is in reference to himself, possibly a background level of energy, which could imply the feedback loop, positive and negative, the hybrid that's proposed by non-linear existentialism. But the more you actually read his words and such, the more it appears, given that possible reference given to this possible grounding, could imply a positive negative feedback loop. And here he goes into the idea of infinity, which really appears upon further inspection to imply an ongoing process of correction, of going over and over, having a state, look at that state, comparing it to another, comparing it to a perfect state, as it were, the absolute truth, which can imply energy, and through that gain more and more towards it. And that's why this one from Finley is very important. I'll read this out. Any object of religion, or anything, well, religion to Hegel is the ultimate, I believe, so he uses that as probably the ultimate object. Object of religion, at first an immediate existence given in sensation, a determinate existence given in perception, and a notion given as behind the immediate to the scientific understanding. Consciousness must now grope forward to an understanding of objects in the form of self, but it does so gradual steps and derives itself into a number of distinct mental postures in which separate sides of the object are gradually brought together, i.e. The synthesis of them, and it gets gradual steps. So if you look at him from a historical point of view, that implies throughout humanity gradual steps towards perfection, but through the individual life, existentialism can also occur, and I think that would have to occur before the historical perspective that Hegel has. So, can Hegel's phenomenology of spirit be interpreted as a cognitive feedback loop similar to that as described in non-linear existentialism? Possibly. I don't think it's really outside of the realm of possibility in this one. I think more and more this work is looked over. More and more I really believe that he's looking at a feedback loop. And the thing is that I think it's very impossible to look at two types of things. We have the negative feedback loop, and overriding it, the overarching thing that he talks about, I think is the positive one. If you bring it back to a humanistic state, you're going to see more and more the possibility that the primary needs baseline activity level for the individual during a lifetime is going to be what I think Hegel is referring to as a supersensible state. Because the thing is, if you remove all the quantity of it, you're going to have the quality, and then to someone at Hegel's time, it would appear to be the in itself, the supersensible state. But the thing is, again, from a purely conceptual point of view, his ideas within what he's saying does, but there's so many different abstractions and such, because he's looking at an idea from so many different ways that it becomes abstract. And if you read, it appears that many times it's not only contradictory, but he's saying that if you read his works, that A is not equal to A and B is not equal to B, because he seems to be contradicting himself in a few times. However, thank you very much for your time. It's a very heady topic. This is just a very brief overview of what the possibility of non-linear existentialism being related to Hegel's works, the dialectic, the force, and certainly other aspects of his theories. I thank you very much.